My name is Kimia Zabian, and I am the advocate for the Grenfell Next of Kin. This is a platform really for the immediate families of the 72 people who were killed in the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy. Sometimes people prefer to use the word died or passed away as a mark of respect, but the next of kin of those who died prefer to use the word killed because they were killed as a result of corporate and state negligence. Well, on 14th of June 2017, it was a very warm night, and so windows were open in the apartment blocks. A fire broke out on the 4th floor at 6 minutes to 1 a.m. and within 20 minutes the entire block was on fire from top to bottom. Within the first 20 minutes, 168 of the 269 occupants walked out, and so there was only 101 people actually left in the tower. For over 2 hours, people were taking instruction from the fire brigade to stay put. Unfortunately, nobody came, and of those 101 people, 72 of them perished in the most horrific way. Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea is a very wealthy borough, one of the wealthiest boroughs in the country, with the most expensive real estate in Western Europe. But this particular corner of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea is one of the most deprived in the country. When the borough decided to refurbish the tower because it was old and it was spoiling the view of the richer population that are forced to look at a great big tower block, they decided to refurbish it in the cheapest possible way. There were so many factors involved, but essentially it boiled down to the products and also the bad decision making and the deregulation which had allowed this situation to occur. The fire was devastating. It completely gutted the entire building and all the belongings of the occupants on almost all the floors. Most people didn't actually have a body to bury. People had what are called commingled remains, which means furniture, objects, as well as human remains that were commingled. But amongst this, there were certain items that had survived miraculously. A lovely Afghan family who lost their father showed me their gold jewelry which had melted. But right next to that gold jewelry was a prayer. Bizarrely, this prayer, written on a piece of paper, survived. Another lady who was the only survivor from the 23rd floor said to me one night, "Listen, I want to show you something," and there was a heart, a metal heart that was all charred and burnt, but the heart itself had survived. I guess we over-sentimentalize some of these objects, but when that's all you have, memories and sentiments and feelings, then you hold on to those things. It's shocking really that the issue of race and class was not something that the state wanted to focus on, because the majority of those who died were black and brown British citizens of recent migration. social housing has always been something that we have been very proud of in this country. It's allowed upward mobility, but in the last 30, 40 years, being a social housing tenant had become something to be ashamed of. So the issue of class was also a very important factor in why these particular people with this particular demographic had ended up in that particular tower block, and how they were treated by their landlord, which was the state, the local council. These were not private properties rented out, these were social housing units. The media coverage was huge, and it failed to, again, identify the issue of race. Naturally, the people who were most affected had language issues because they were recent migrants, and they were traumatized. The media in the immediate aftermath needed people to speak to and about what had happened, and it gravitated to those who were perhaps not at the heart of the tragedy, but to those who were capable of connecting and articulating what they had seen or witnessed, or what their experience and their take was. It was very much told through a very white filter. The response from the community was very solid, and within a couple of days after the fire, the community actually marched down to the town hall in what was almost like a storming of the Bastille moment. There had been a general election called by the Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, and it was a very divisive election because it was all around Brexit. Theresa May won the election, but with a reduced majority, and within days of this divisive election, Grenfell Tower fire happened. The fear of social disorder was something that guided the principles of the course of action that the state took. Literally, the state prioritized the state instead of the actual victims. People use that word justice as a calling, we must have justice, no peace, where is the justice? And all of those things are words, and actually for someone who's lost a child, or a beloved husband, or father or mother, it means different things to different people. Normally, when a crime is committed, the police will investigate, and then they will find the evidence, and they will take the evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service. And the Crown Prosecution Service will make charging decisions. But in this situation, we had an inquiry, and the inquiry actually stopped the criminal justice process. And it gave an opportunity to those individuals and organizations to come to an inquiry to defend themselves. Inevitably, they all blamed each other, which means that now the CPS will find it very difficult to charge the individual based on the evidence by the police, because they will have to take into consideration the mitigation and defense that that individual or organization gave. So it's a bit complicated, but the bottom line is that the inquiry itself was the problem. It delayed justice, and it will mean that it will be very difficult for the CPS to bring manslaughter charges against individuals and organizations who have already appeared in the inquiry and mitigated and defended themselves against that evidence. ACMPE cladding is a problem. The developers like to use it because it's cheap and it makes the building look expensive. It's just aesthetics. From a safety point of view, it is literally like pouring petrol on a building. In the UK alone, there are 4,000 buildings with ACMPE cladding, and in fact the government very immediately put together a sort of remediation program, and so the cladding could start to be removed. But of course it's a hugely costly business, and so the question is, who's paying for it? Is it the taxpayer, or should it be the actual builders and developers? One of the things that next of kin families are really keen to do as a legacy for what's happened to their lives and their families' lives is that there should be a common standard for these products, at least across Europe, if not the rest of the world. Since Grenfell, we have had other ACMPE cladding fires. In Milan, for instance, at Torre de Moro was a new building that also had the same cladding material installed in the same way, in the cassette form, and within the same 20 minutes the entire building was on fire. The fire spread very, very fast all around the building. If you put the three pictures of just these European fires that we've had in the last few years side by side, you put Grenfell, Milan, Torre de Moro and Valencia fire, you will not be able to tell them apart. They behave in exactly the same way. The fire just spreads very quickly and takes control of the building and produces a lot of toxic fumes, which eventually kill people. The response to Grenfell Tower fire was huge, and the ripple effects of it is huge and ongoing. Laws are being changed and new regulations coming in, and there's so much discussion and there's so much conversation around the dead that very often the individual person who's died is completely lost in that narrative. One of the things that the next of kin families talk to me a lot about is that they have become spectators in their own tragedy, that they're almost extras, and this is sort of this huge theatre that goes on, and they are not even at the center of it, where your personal loss has become public property and very often exploited, actually, because after a disaster there is always profiteering, and that's one of the aspects that's become very hurtful. At a certain point, Grenfell sort of started to impact the cultural field. Important writers and painters and filmmakers like Steve McQueen, who were touched by what they had seen and presumably recognized that issue of race, even though it wasn't part of the official narrative. We have to wonder why it is that someone like Chris O'Philly or someone like Steve McQueen felt compelled to offer some artistic expression. So I think that art has an enormous place in this type of situation, because it means that it can never be forgotten. It's the power of our cultural practitioners, our artists, that can really force agendas and attention in a more visceral way. The principle of offering to create a memorial is a very good idea, but the process has been absolutely terrible. On one hand, there's this illusion of why this is so important and how much it matters. On the other hand is the fact that the reality is, for the individual next of kin families, is that nothing they say or do really matters. You're not actively involved, you're just a reason for the memorial. The only way that people can survive that hurt and rejection is by disengaging, because their non-engagement becomes important in a way. The fact that they are now not even trying, but just saying, we will not participate because we know that our voice doesn't matter. I think that people who have lost their immediate families do not want to keep exposing themselves and their trauma to people over and over again. And so the need for a spokesperson, the need for an advocate is literally essential in making sure that they have a voice and agency. And I'm privileged to be trusted with that role by them, but it is not something that I do by choice. It is literally privilege to serve and to be of service for as long as is necessary. Because the tower itself is a strong symbol and has a presence, a few years ago we did a projection onto the tower, and the projection was "We can't breathe," because the final words of everyone in the tower just before they died, when they were on the phone to the fire brigade or to their families or friends, every single one of them was saying, "We can't breathe." And so after the George Floyd moment in the United States and the Black Lives Matter movement, we felt that we should do this projection onto the tower saying, "We can't breathe." And it was very powerful. It was only up for about 20 minutes. But there was an absolute fear by the local council that the tower itself should be used for messaging. And so the community was gaslighted that this mustn't happen, this is a sacred ground, and we mustn't be doing this onto the actual tower itself. So we decided to do these billboards, and it really came from some really great people who got in touch with me and said, can we do anything to support? And one of them is a fabulous guy, Noel Douglas, who's a graphic designer, he's a lecturer at one of the art colleges, and so he did these series of posters, and then somebody donated the sites. So all around London we've done these big billboards and massive posters. And just like we're doing with Grenfell Next of Kin, there are others who have just quietly been doing things. And one of the projects that came up straight after the fire by this lovely lady called Tuesday Greenridge is she started what is I think referred to as craftivism, which is activism through crafts, arts and crafts. And she just started doing these quilts with some of the people in the community in the local library, and they started putting together these massive quilts, the Grenfell Memorial quilts. The tower itself is a symbol of what happened there, and most people, certainly Londoners, know about it, and as they see it every day or drive past it or whatever, it's visible, it's on the landscape. The issue over the deconstruction of the tower was very, very sensitive, but ultimately it comes down to an engineering issue. It is not safe for it to stand as it is, and eventually it's going to have to be deconstructed anyway. It cannot be maintained in that same way forever. They will start the deconstruction after the 8th anniversary, which is this June. It will happen gradually, and it will take up to 2 years for it to all be demolished down to the ground, or maybe they won't demolish it to the ground, they will keep some of the floors. Nobody really knows. And that's the problem, that no one really has a say in anything. There are lessons to be learned from Grenfell. The main thing is that I think that the state is responsible for the safety of its citizens. So regulations around building are not something that we should be opting in and out of depending on what the political agenda is. It's just the basic requirement for the state to safeguard citizens, and when something goes wrong, to correct it and to support those citizens who have become victims, instead of expecting the victims to fight for their rights and for that support. The invitation to participate in the Triennale was really touching, and we really appreciate it because it allows us again to speak to a wider audience and bring more people into understanding what these families are going through, and hopefully work together towards the standardization that I talked about with regards to ACMPE cladding particularly. But more than that, it's the recognition by a wider community beyond our own borders of the essential issues at the heart of this terrible tragedy, which is inequalities. So we're really grateful for that opportunity to participate.